Alright, so I'm going to talk about how to create a heat map with Seaborn in Python. I'm going to talk about how to create it and then how to manipulate all the little things within it to get it to how you like. So this one right here is one I made. So we're going to try to get it to look something like that. And then I made a more complex code here that puts multiple heat maps. We'll leave a link to it somewhere below in the description or the comments. So I've created a Python file here and I've gotten some initial stuff in here. So the first thing we're going to do is the libraries, pandas, numpy, matplotlib, seaborn, and streamlit. Streamlit's what we're going to be using to view the graph. And then the next step here, we've got two variables, number of columns, number of rows. This is going to be for each individual heat map. So I'm only doing one here, so it's going to be one 9x9 heat map. Right here we've got data, so we're creating random data anywhere from 0 to 100. And on the size parameter here we've said it's going to be a 9x9, number of rows, number of columns. Then we've created a data frame. We put that data into a data frame. So we said heat map data frame equals pd.dataFrame. The first variable data, that's going to be the data up here. Index and columns. Now this is going to be used in order to make sure that the tick axis here start at 1. By default these are going to start at 0. So if without those two parameters it would show 0 all the way down to 8. We want it to be 1 through 9. So that's what we're saying here. The index is going to be the y-axis, starting at 1, ending at number of rows plus 1. And then in the columns, same thing. Starting at 1, ending number of rows plus 1. Put plus 1 because this is going to represent 10. What it'll do is it starts at 1. It'll go up to 10, but it won't do 10. So if we were to put 9 there, it wouldn't do 9. So that's what that is. All right, so down here is where we start initializing it. Now, a lot of these codes do it. There's a lot of different ways I've seen it. Most of them will say something like fig ax. I don't know why they use these terms. Not very helpful. So I've started using canvas chart. And that sort of helps ID what they are. So if you look here, that fig that they refer to in the documentation, that's going to be the canvas here. That's all of this whole thing, the black outline. And then the ax that they refer to in the documentation is going to be the little charts within it. So you can see here, this would be like the 4x4 here. Right here. So each of these little charts is an ax, and then the fig is the entire image. I'm going to say canvas and chart here. Plt.Subplots. Then we've got 4 parameters here. First one, in calls and in rows. This is number of columns, number of rows. So this is referring to how many charts we're going to have in the image here. So if we were to do a 2x2 like this, where we have 2 heat maps going vertically and 2 heat maps going across, then we would put 2x2 there. But we're only going to do 1, so we're going to say 1 and 1. Fig size, this affects how the chart is laid out at the image, whether it's small or large. It's really difficult and not very easy to understand what the numbers are. So 10.8 seems to be a number that gives us a good visual. So I've been using 10.8 for whenever we're doing just 1. And then constrained layout here as true. You see right here the note matplotlib auto calculate spacing. So the titles, axis, labels, tick labels, and color bars don't overlap. So this would be important if we were doing more than 1. So to create the heat map, said heat map equals SNS, short for Seaborn.Heatmap. And we started out here with just 2 parameters, and these are going to be the first couple of parameters we need. First is the data. So we put the data up here in this data frame. So we're referring to the data frame where our data is at. And then ax, again, this is normally ax equals ax, but here, since I said chart, I'm saying ax equals chart. It's telling it which of these graphs is this particular line referring to. So if we had a situation where we had multiple graphs, right, it would want to know you're doing all of this information for this heat map, but which heat map are we talking about? Are we talking about 1? Are we talking about 2? Are we talking about 3? Are we talking about 4? So this is where you'd specify which exact chart. Since we're using 1 though, we'll just say chart there. So we can come over here to the documentation and we can see all of the parameters. There's a lot of parameters both on here and then not included on here. So I'm going to start at the top and sort of talk about the ones I've used and what exactly they control and sort of show how that works. Before I do that, we can open up the Streamlit and see just those 2 variables there does give us a heat map. So this is how it looks sort of default, and then we're going to change some things around. All right, so let's dig into some of the other parameters here that we can use to change the chart around. First one here, I'm going to use a CMap. This is going to tell us what the color scheme is going to be. So there's a lot of different ones. Couldn't find an easy place to go where it shows you all the choices with the colors. But the one I found that I'm going to use is it's going to be RDYLGN. It stands for red, yellow, green. Now there were a couple of places in my research that I found that had some information on what colors are available. This is one page here that had a number of different ones. So you can see the name up here, YLGNBU. That was this first one here, yellow, green, blue. And then it has a bunch of different other ones here. ChatGPT also gave some options here. You can see some of the different ones that it produced. And then it suggested this code right here. So I didn't do this, but it may try it out and see if it'll produce all the color maps with this code here. Next one here is going to be center. What this will do is it controls where the midpoint is on your color bar. So if you look here, you can see this defaults to 50. So we did 0 to 100 and it defaults to that middle ground there. But if you wanted to change it to, let's say, 90, we could do that. And you'll see a lot of red here. You can see the yellow is up there at the top. And then if we wanted it to be lower, we could change it to maybe a 10, and then it's all green. So you can play with that. You can also use a variable, if you have a code where you want to have some threshold to measure this at. That's what you would use that one for. If you don't want to specify anything and you just want it to be whatever the default is, here you can say none, and that it'll automatically default to what it would be if you didn't specify the center parameter there. Next one is robust. What this is essentially is it ignores outliers. So if you have data with a bunch of outliers on the front end or the back end, it can mess up your colors to where it'll make everything look sort of diluted. So robust will ignore those. You would just say true here, and it'll do that. The next one is annote, stands for annotations. What that refers to are the numbers inside of all of these little squares here. So if you want to see that, you would say and not equals true. All right, so we can pause here and go over here and refresh and see the changes that makes to the graph here. All right, there we go. So we're back to where we were, 50 as the middle ground. We've now got numbers in these squares. Digging through my notes here, I found a chat that walked through a short summary of all of the little parameters here. So I wanted to record this into the video. The next one here we're going to is FMT. You can see controls how the numbers in the cell are formatted. So we're going to talk about all the different choices there. 0.2F refers to 2 decimal places. And then if you wanted to have no decimal places, you would say the letter D as in David. I see on there that it also lists 0.0f as an option. So asked it the difference here. It talks about if you do have floats, which are decimals, so if your data might be 42.39 or something like that, then you would want to use 0.0f. D would be if you know you have integers, which in this case we know we have just basic whole numbers. On the FMT variable, you can see here we have a bunch of different options. One of them is percentage. This was one that I was looking at. However, what it does is when you do this percentages, it automatically multiplies by 100. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because my numbers were already in percentage form. I just needed to add that little percent sign. But from what I can tell, there's no way to get around this. You would have to basically divide by 100 the data in the data frame, and then have it in decimal format in the data frame itself, and then pass it 0.2% here, and that'll automatically multiply it by 100. So something to be aware of there. So over here I'll say FMT equals, we'll just say 0f just to be safe. The next one here is A note KWS. We'll come back to that in a minute. That's a little more complicated. We'll move on to line widths. So what this is controlling the lines in between the charts. So you don't see any right here where like in between these little squares there's no line. But if we want a line, we can tell it to have a line by passing a line width value. So we'll say line widths equals 1. We'll refresh this and we should see a black line. Okay, it's white, so we'll have to change that color, but you can see that there's a little spacing there in between all of those. And then the next one, line color, we'll say black. And we can see we now have a little black line there to separate out all of those squares. Next one is C bar. What that stands for is color bar. So if you come back over here, you can see on the right side here is a vertical color bar, sort of like a legend showing us what color would refer to which number. We can turn that on and off as we want. So if we didn't want to see that, we could say C bar equals false. And when we refresh, we'll see that it's no longer there. If we want to see it, we can say true. The next one, C bar KWS. We'll talk about this in a minute. This is where maybe the next question would be, what if we didn't want to see it vertically? What if we wanted to see it horizontally? The parameter C bar KWS is where we would go to change that. We'll go into that in a minute. And the last ones I use that are on this list is the X tick labels and Y tick labels. This is true by default, but what it'll do is it'll make sure that they are on there. I noticed when I began to put multiple heat graphs on there that it sometimes would automatically increment. So this just makes sure that all the numbers are on there. Alright, so we'll come back up here to A0 KWS. So I'm not a computer guy. This is stuff sort of foreign to me, and they certainly don't make it readable to the common person. KWS, though, basically what this means is when it says KWS, it normally has a little link here. So if you click on this, it means that all of these parameters are also things that you can use to change some things around, but it has to be formatted a little differently than just passing a value to the parameter. So right here, I'll add in A0 KWS, and we have to pass it in a squiggly brackets. So, and then we can come in here and see which ones we can use. So the ones I used here, first one was font size. When we go to write this, we have to do it in a string format, which are the exclamation points, or I'm sorry, quotation marks, colon, separating them. And then we would name the size. So here, let's just say 14. And what that'll do is it'll change. Remember that A0 means the little numbers inside of these cells. So when we refresh, we should see, make sure to put a comma right here. We should see those numbers are a bit bigger. We can also bold it by saying weight of bold. Those are a little thicker there. And then what we could do is change the color if we wanted to. Now, I did not use this, and I'll tell you why here. What you'll notice is that it automatically has some black and some white based on the color in the background. So it's automatically switching based on which color is more readable. And I like that rather than, I'm not going to do any fancy coloring or anything. So that's, to me, is a lot better than specifying just black or just white, because then, it could be a little difficult on these red to read. So I did not use that one, but it is something that is there if it's something that you want to pursue. All right, next useful one, let's do rotation. So this controls what direction your little numbers in there are going. So 0 is going to be the default. If you wanted to do the other way for whatever reason, you would do 90. If you wanted to do sideways, 45. Okay, so that's how that works. Next parameter that I included, HA, and then there's also one called VA. What this stands for is horizontal alignment and vertical alignment. So it automatically defaults to center there, but if you didn't want it there, if you wanted it, let's say horizontal, I think it takes top. Let's see. No, it doesn't like that. Okay, I did the wrong one here. So let's say left for the horizontal and then top. All right, on the top left. We could come here and see, I don't know, it doesn't look top left to me. But that is how you would move it around. If you wanted to make them italics, you could come here and say style. And then the last one I had on here was alpha, and what this is opacity. So it defaults to 1. That means it's, you fully see it. If you wanted it to be completely invisible, you would say 0. So let's just look at that. Sorry, here it's an italic, no S. All right, so the things there are no longer there because we've made it 0. If we wanted it to be like half there, half not there, we would say 50%. You can see it's sort of visible, sort of blurry. So that's something there that you can play around with. So that's what this not KWS is. It's just a bunch of different stuff that you can use to mess around with the numbers inside of it. And over here on matplot.axis.axis.text is where you go to find all of the different ones that you can use. So there's a bunch of different ones here you can play around with. The last one on here, Seaborn KWS. So we can come right down below Seaborn here. And there's a bunch of different things you can do. Play around with it a little bit, but the one thing that I found useful for it, if you come here to Colorbar and then orientation, you can see this changes the orientation of the color bar, so we can pass it vertical or horizontal. So right here we'll say orientation, and then if we wanted it to be horizontal, we could say horizontal there. All right, and then when we refresh this over here, we should see, yep, the color bars move to the bottom there. So we can change that around based on that parameter there. All right, so that's all we can do from the parameters. There are some things though we still want to manipulate. The first thing is these little tick labels on the X and Y axis, right? They're very small. The ones on the Y are rotated 90 degrees, so we want to do some fixing there. How we can do that, we can refer to the heat map, which is the variable we assigned the heat map there. And then we'll say set underscore X tick labels. And when you come to the documentation, again, to a layman like myself, it doesn't provide a whole lot of help. So here we're going to go over the three variables I used here. The first one we're going to use is label. That's going to be what we named our heat map. So we named it heat map dot get xtick labels. And so what this is doing is it's just saying use for the values here for the xtick, use the xtick labels. So it's sort of repetitive here. It's the default one, but I just have to put that. And then the next one will be font size. So we can increase the font size here. Let's say 12. All right, it has to be label with an S. All right, so they're a little bigger there. Let's see if we can get those noticeably bigger. There we go. So those are noticeably bigger there at 18. And then the other thing I'm going to put here, I'm sorry, that's for the Y. So let's just leave that like that. So that'll be it for that. Then we'll come down here, we'll copy and paste this. And right here where it says X tick, we'll change this to Y tick. And we'll leave the same parameters, change this to Y tick over here. But the one we'll add to get these to rotate right side up will be rotation equals 0. All right, and you can see there, now those are a little easier to read. They're bigger, they're right side up, so we don't have to turn our neck to the side. So those are looking good there. Next thing we'll add is the x-axis and y-axis labels, the titles to them. So we'll say chart dot set x label. Down here we'll say x label. And what do we want to name it? So we'll say x label here. Similar to the ones above, we'll say font size. And we'll make this a little bigger. We'll say 22. We can also make it bold if we want by saying weight equals bold. And then what we're going to have is these are pretty close to the ticks, and so we can give it a little space between the ticks by saying label pad and then giving it a number. So let's say 10. All right, so that looks pretty good there. Maybe we could say we'll give it a little more of a pad there at 15. There we go, it's got a little space there. And then for the y-axis, same exact thing. So we'll take this, copy paste, we'll change the X label to Y label. And then we want to make sure we change that first parameter there from X label to Y label. There we go, so we got that one there. Next one will be giving it a title. So we'll say chart.set title. First one we'll do is label, and this will be whatever we want our title to be. So we'll say title here. And similarly, we'll say font size, and we want this to be a bit bigger, so we'll say 28. We can also pass it weight of bold, and then we can also do a padding. Here we'll say pad instead of label pad. Go ahead and refresh that. All right, we see a little bit of a space there. Let's try to increase it to see what that looks like. All right, so we got a little bit more of a space there. So We got the title there. All right, so I think I've touched on just about everything I wanted to touch on to just get a basic heat map here. The documentations were just unreadable for me. They weren't helpful. Maybe if you do this as a career, it's readable, but wasn't particularly readable for me. So these were okay, but the other ones were pretty rough. So it took me a little time to figure this out with the computer, and wanted to share. So I hope this is helpful. All right, so I'm going to briefly go into if you wanted to expand it to multiple heat maps. I realized as I got into it that it's a bit of a rabbit hole, so the code's a little long, but we can talk about some of the basic stuff just to get, just to show how you would get it working sort of briefly. So first thing we do here right down here where it says heat map, where we created the heat map, we'd put a for loop here, and we'll say for I, let's say for I chart in enumerate, say charts here. Now, so this is how the easiest way I found to do it. So when we have multiple ones here, we'll change this second parameter to charts, and then this little snippet of code here we'll put right between this and the for loop. And then we'll put all of this information going down to chart title. We'll bring that all the way up and indent it into the for loop. Now up here at the data, we have one set of data in a data frame, but we're going to need 4 sets. So how we'll change this around here is, instead of saying heat map, we'll say dictionary of data frames, and I'm going to change this to a dictionary. The dictionary has a key and then a value. So the key is going to be I, and then the value is going to be the data frame. And we'll begin and end those with squiggly brackets. And then what we need to have it do is do a for loop 4 times through. So for I, or however many graphs we want on there. So for now, let's just do 2. So we'll say for I in range of 2. So that'll cycle through. Remember, the data is random, so it'll cycle through 2 times. It'll give us 2 sets of random data, 9 by 9 each, and it'll store it in a dictionary. And then to access that down here at the data, what we'll say is, instead of having heat map df, we'll say dictionary of data frames. And then we'll say I there. I is going to be, the first cycle is going to be, I think it's 0. So right up here, this will be, when it cycles through the first time here, we're doing a for loop here as well, it'll be 0. The first set of data will be stored at 0. The second set of data will be stored at 1. And then same thing will work down here at this for loop. It'll do 0 and 1. First one will be referring to 0, so it'll go up to this dictionary, pull up the 0 key, pull the data from it, and use it in that for loop. All right, one oversight I had here, where axis is, we're going to put charts. So we've got charts 4 times here. We got it right here on subplots. We've got it 2 times there, and then we've got it in the enumerate. So next we have to decide for this second heat map, do we want it to go to the right of it and have it going across, or do we want it vertical? So what we're going to do is we're going to do it going across. So up here we'll say number of columns will be 2. If we want it to be vertical, we would put 2 on the rows. So what I'm going to do next up here is create a variable section up top and have 2 variables here, number of heat maps across, number of heat maps vertical. What we'll do is we'll take the across, and that will be the columns, paste that there, and then the vertical will be the rows, and that will be there. Now, running into an issue with Streamlit where sometimes it will be a layout of wide, and sometimes it'll be a layout of sort of a normal centered. Maybe on your screen it's looking a lot smaller than this. So how I get around that is come into here, and right at the very top, right after imports, we're going to paste this in. st.setPageConfig layout equals wide, and so that's going to make it bigger here. And so if we refresh here, all right, so obviously that's looking terrible. Like I say, you sort of have to guess around with these fig size and then the sizes as well. I'm going to copy and paste this from the other code here that has all of the labels that I found, the sizes that I found to be the best. So we'll come here, paste that in there, and simply all we're doing here is we're just defining all of these variables that are within the code. So fig size, we'll come down here and say fig size there. A not font size will come down, and where it says a not font size here, instead of 16, we'll pass the variable. And so we're just going to do that for all of these. All right, so I went ahead and replaced all of the variables here, basically where we had those integer numbers. So label pad, font size, and you can see we're looking a lot better over here. One thing I did want to talk about, the only one that is not easily able to find there is colorbar underscore font size. In order to do this, we're going to have to copy in some different code here. So right under set title, I'm going to paste it in. All right, and so where it says label size equals, you could define a number here, but we're going to do font size so that it'll change based on how many charts we have. So down here, we'll want to change this first one here to chart to match what we've named it here in the for loop. But then on the second one where it says ax, we want to leave that alone. I'm realizing we started out doing 2 across, and somehow it became vertical. But you can see here, so we can come up to these variables and change them around. So we were at the going from top to bottom, and then we can change that around here. And it sort of looks squished up here, but when we expand it out, you can see it looks normal. And then if you wanted to open image a new tab and save it, looks pretty decent there. All right, so that's going to be it. I'm going to leave the longer code a link somewhere down there so you can scroll through it and see some of the other stuff in there, the advanced stuff that and how it works. So I hope this is helpful.